What is up, YouTube, and welcome back to the channel. Today I bring you the Porsche Carrera 4S. There's only one vehicle on this planet that has been tweaked, improved, refined, and made better every single time. Now imagine going to work for 55 years to try to improve the exact same thing and make it better and actually make differences year in, year out. 55 years this car has been built. This 911 is in its 8th generation, and I am excited to review this thing for you guys today. So thank you for joining me. Let's go. All right, guys, finally we are in the 2021 Porsche Carrera 4S, and this handles better than my R8. I mean, and this is a Carrera. Like, I can't even imagine the turbo. And the turbos are pulling numbers of, we won't get there because this thing does it in 3.4 seconds, which is still insane. I mean, you don't need anything faster than this. There should be that limit, and that limit is basically 2.9 in the Taycan for me. The twos is insane. The fact this does it in 3.4, oh my God. This is the best in the world. I mean, nobody does it better than Porsche in terms of feeling confident, an everyday driver, and honing their craft. That's what they do extremely well. I mean, this thing just, man, this thing's a rocket with grip. I want to give a big shout out to Porsche of London for letting us borrow this 2021 Porsche 911 4S. Thanks, guys. That's awesome. All right, so check this thing out. This thing makes 443 horsepower and 390 foot-pounds of torque. Yeah, 443 horsepower sounds like a lot, and it is, but what's even crazier is how fast this thing gets from 0 to 60. This thing does it in 3.4 seconds. That is faster than my 2018 R8. That is not that fast. It does it in about 3.6, 3.7 seconds. It may be able to get to 3.5, but that's if I'm really on it. And my 2001 911 Turbo, well, it's in 4 seconds flat. This thing is a modern day supercar, and that is mind-blowing. I'm still in shock that this is a Carrera. All right, so here's the crazy part. You can get this in manual. Manual, yes, amazing. 7-speed manual, you can get this bad boy in. Here's the problem. When you get it in PDK, you actually get something called Torque Vectoring Plus with an electronic rear differential that is fully, advanced. When you get the manual, you actually just get a mechanical rear differential. And what does that equate to in terms of performance? Well, the automatic does 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds, and if you get Sport Chrono, it does it in 3.4 seconds. And here's the crazy part. In manual, it does it in 4.2 seconds. How can a manual be that much slower than the automatic? Well, that's where we are today, folks. We're in the future. If you don't believe me in terms of transmission, take a look at my 2002 911 Turbo. This makes 414 horsepower and does 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds in an automatic. A manual, you ask? 3.6 seconds. Yes, it's 0.2 seconds faster. Whereas this thing is basically 0.8 seconds slower in a manual. Yes, transmissions are all the deal. So for those that don't know what PDK stands for, it stands for Porsche Doppelkupplung, which is a total kibosh of how that's actually supposed to be said or translated or pronounced. But it basically means that it's Porsche's dual clutch gearbox, and it's their 8-speed, and it is fantastic. So let's talk about variants. And in those variants, there's basically 2 engines that you can get, or at least 2 power outputs, because they're both powered by a 3-liter flat 6 twin turbo. Now with that said, they make 379 horsepower, and as I mentioned in this car, 443 horsepower. Now when you add it all up, how many Carreras can you get? Well, you can get a Carrera base, a Carrera S, a Carrera 4, a Carrera 4S, a Targa, and all those variants in a Cabrio. Yeah, that's a lot of variants, and add options. So you can get any Carrera, any style, any color, any option, especially for you. You're wondering how expensive this Porsche is, and it is expensive. This thing tops out to about 180 Canadian, which is a lot of money, except resale. Porsche historically has one of the highest resales in the industry. Now, if you don't believe me, look at a 5-year-old 911. They're still holding about half the value, which is crazy because most cars drop about 50% in the first 3 years, which is crazy. So something unique about this specific 911, which they call the 992 generation, is that all bodies look the same for Carreras and turbos. You see, back in that generation, or the last generation called the 991, in order for you to get these wide hips in the back, you'd actually have to get the models at the top, whether it be a GTS, a 4S, or even a turbo. You couldn't get a base Carrera to look this good. And speaking of hips, look at these hips on the back of this 992 and compare it to a turbo of that year. Now granted, this turbo didn't have the biggest hips you could get, but look how skinny these hips are in comparison to those hips. So in terms of materials, everything on this 911 992 is basically aluminum. This is 5 pounds heavier than my 2002 turbo, which obviously at the time had no equipment compared to this thing. And on top of that, this thing's got something called a lithium-ion battery, which obviously everybody knows because it's the same thing that's in your cell phone, but it's also very light. So they've gone as far as messing around with the battery in this car. Crazy. Crazy. Now let's talk about the visuals of the front end of this 911. This specific 911, the 992, has been dubbed the retro modern 911, and that's because it pays tribute to the 964 front end. They've got these really big bug eye sort of headlights, but it's really, really curvy, and you can't really tell from the front, but you can tell from here. When you step this and look its direction, it's very curvy, very wide, and very floaty. When you're inside this 911, you actually don't realize how beautiful the outside is. You're like, yeah, inside's sweet, it's nice, it's solid, it feels good, and you know you're gonna have a great experience driving it, but you don't actually know how nice the outside is. I mean, they've honed this outside like no other car out there. It is so perfectly done. Good job, Porsche. Good job. What is new for this 911 is something called wet mode. Now underneath here, there's basically acoustic sensors that can hear if there's water being slushed around in this area. Now here's an example, is that it rains like crazy and the wipers are not on because you leave when it stops raining, but there's water on the ground. So you're driving and water gets churned in here, and what that does is it lets the driver know that it's wet outside and they have to manually adjust to wet mode. And what wet mode does is it does open up the front flaps underneath the front bumper here. It does take the spoiler to its maximum performance setting after about 50 miles an hour, but what it does is it sort of tunes the accelerator. It gives it more of a flat feel. That way, it's not on maximum acceleration. But not only that, it actually deactivates the sport mode. So it takes all the maximum grip available to the car so that you don't drive like a maniac when it's wet. All right, so the side of this car. On the side, obviously we'll talk about this front Excite design matrix headlight. Those are LEDs, but these have a staggered setup. So this specific case, they've got winter, so 19s in the front, 20s in the back, but they've got something called nose lift. And what happens if you're going over a pretty high bump, you sort of hit a button on the dash inside, and this raises up. But if we move along the side here, if you look, it's all glass. I love how it's glass, glass, glass. It's just one big long panel that appears to be. But the meat and potatoes, guys, is the back. The back end of 911s have always been money, and this is no different. You've got a really cool touch here with this third brake light. Now, if you count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 11. Or if you look at it a different way, this is 992. So you can look at it this way, 9, 9, 2, or 9, 11. Kind of cool, 992 and 9911 all in one shot. Boom. Take a look at this rear spoiler. Now this thing comes up, but it's really, really wide, and you're gonna see it in this little frame here. This back spoiler is massive. And they also have incorporated this full LED brake light all the way through from end to end that wraps around the body of this Carrera 4S. It does have these wider now tailpipes that pop through, that these are all black, which is a nice touch. This does have the sport chrono finish, so while we were filming, we always leave the lights on so we actually get better production. So we leave the keys in the car because we just don't want to lose it and have the binging all the time. So what happened was we looked inside and we're like, we locked the keys in this car, and I'm pulling and it's not working. Except you actually have to pull it harder. So we're thinking that that's crazy. It actually has a manual override if the battery dies on the door handle. Pretty cool. And speaking of door handles, these door handles are all new for the 992 body style because they actually fold right in and make a flat look when the car is closed. All right, so we're gonna figure out how easy it is to launch a Porsche 911 Carrera 4S, a 992. Now, so foot on the brake, I'm gonna turn this right to Sport Plus. I'm gonna hold down the stability program, and then PSM was switched off, and I slam the throttle, and then I'm 5,000 RPM, and I sidestep the brake, and this happens. Oh my God. Oh my God. So this is the cool part. Okay, I don't know if you guys got that or not, but what happens is that when I hit the brake, hold the brake down, and I hammer the gas all the way down, it goes to about 2,500 until it realizes that I'm asking for launch control, and then it goes right to 5,000 RPM, and then it just waits there until I'm ready. Amazing, amazing. It's not like the cars that build up, hold, and then you're trying to figure out, no, this knows. It's like 2,500 RPM, it's like, wait a minute, launch control, 5,000 RPM. It's got a personality. I love it, I love it. Let's go. The seats are called Bordeaux red. This is the color of the stitching and the color of the seats itself. Now, one thing I want to say that this dash has sort of a retro flat design, which is sort of from the classic 911s, and this sort of 7-inch dual, so 7-inch in the right and 7-inch on the left, and it has a center tack, and the tack also has a different sort of look, and it's sort of this retro look. And then they've kind of modernized it by having this floating design steering wheel, and they have this new sort of thumpy little shift knob that's sort of weird, but I'm sort of used to that because on the Taycan they had it as the shifter up here, and now the shifter is down here. But everything else is awesome because when you look in your rear view and they see these really wide hips, I can't believe this is a Carrera and not a turbo, although it is a turbo Carrera because, as I mentioned, since 2016 all Carreras have turbo engines, so 3-liter turbo in the Targa and the GTS. So as I mentioned, we've got two 7-inch screens here. So on the right is basically where most of your display happens. So they do have the map, the Sport Chrono, which is basically a stopwatch, your G-forces, your all-wheel drive bias. Now, this is primarily rear-wheel drive. It's very, very light to the front wheels. I'm looking at it right now, and as I'm coasting at about 50 miles an hour or 90 kilometers an hour, I'm all rear-wheel drive and a very tiny bit front-wheel drive. And then your tire pressure, which they spell T-Y-R-E. And yeah, and then you got your sport options or your sport modes, which are basically wet, normal, sport, sport plus, and then individual, and then your trip computers, and then back to the map. So let's take this. Oh my God, rear wheel steering at its finest. It's so nice to have the engine right here and just the sound. I've got this thing rolling around, and there is a cup holder for this thing, and it's not here. It's an authentic European one that slides out of the passenger side dash, which reminds me of a really old Audi, and I used to always hate on it because it came out of the dash, and I love it, and thank you, Porsche, for bringing it back, because it's right behind you over here. Goodbye, noise. So the one drawback I will say about this Porsche is there's just not a lot of space to put anything. Now, I do like the fact that it's got a 2+2, because in my specific case, that's the reason why I bought a turbo, because I couldn't fit my kid anywhere, and I could only take the wife or the kid, and what's the point of having a toy if you can't take the whole family? Or maybe that's the reason you buy a toy, not to take the whole family. But for me, I'd like to take, there's 3 of us, and it does help that you have these 2 back seats in the back. Now, on the steering wheel, we've got this button, and this button is a sport response button, which gives me 20 seconds of full throttle. The shifting is like... I gotta take these glasses off and get serious here. I always feel in control, and this jacket gives me a bit of a belly. It's the European jacket for you. Every European jacket that I have does this. European jacket makers, what's up with this? All right, so on a serious note, the only complaint I will have about this Carrera is the lack of storage space in it. I just don't find there's a lot of storage space. It's very driver oriented. These screens are tailored towards me. The tack is centered, but each 7-inch screen is pivoted towards me. And everything is obviously driver oriented. There are complaints out there that the steering wheel, you can't really see exactly both sides of the dash because the steering wheel sort of hedges out a little bit. But to me, you just move your head a little to the left, a little to the right, and you are a driver and you are moving, so that shouldn't be really a complaint to you. We are on winter tires right now. This is not performance tires or the 20s in the front and 21s in the back, which has a staggered setup, which comes from factory the way it is. Staggered. 20s in the front, 21s in the back, from factory, out of the box, just like this. Except this has 19s in the front and 20s in the back because it's winters, but you get the drift. Well, it's about that time I have to give a car back, and I'm usually pretty good about it, but this one, I don't want to give back. It is such a good piece of machinery. Porsche, you've done an awesome job. I am thrilled to drive this stuff. And, well, we'll see you in the next car. Don't forget to subscribe.